but we'll get started anyway. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So the last couple of weeks, I spoke about samatha and vipassana meditation. This week I'm going to continue the theme of talking about meditation. I'm going to talk about the Brahmaviharas, the 4 divine abidings. They're also called the immeasurables or the limitless states. Called divine abidings, or Brahmavihara. Vihara means dwelling place, like a house or a monastery is sometimes called a Vihara. And Brahmas are the beings beyond the plane of sensuality, and their normal state of existence is close to the dwelling places of the mind in the Brahmaviharas. There are 4 Brahmaviharas: Metta, Karuna, Mudita, and Upekkha. The usual English renderings that people are familiar with would be loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. The benefit of doing these meditations in particular is to counteract defilements based on dosa, ill will. So one who practices the Brahmaviharas overcomes anger and irritation, ill will generally. They're also very brightening to the mind. They feel good. They have a healing and purifying and brightening aspect to clear all the negativity and darkness out of the mind. And there are different ways of doing the Brahmaviharas, and we'll talk about that. First of all, I'll make a general observation that I found the people who really need to do the Brahmaviharas, that would really benefit from it, they have a lot of resistance to doing it. And the people who really take to it right away, they mostly generally don't need it. They're the types who are already full of loving kindness. Of course, it doesn't do them any harm, and it's good for anybody to do it. But the people who really need it, they have a lot of resistance to it. And I think some of this resistance comes from a misunderstanding of the nature of the Brahmaviharas. So I think, first of all, it's very important to define these states more precisely. We'll begin with Metta. Now, that's generally translated loving kindness, as you probably all know. And I think in many ways that's an unfortunate translation. And I think this is one of the reasons that a lot of people have resistance to doing the practice. It sounds sort of sappy, almost, loving kindness, to some people, right? Like the reaction to it. It's really not quite that. It's more benevolence. The traditional aspiration for practicing metta is, may all beings be well and happy. And that is quite different from loving all beings. there's a way in which it is love, depending on how you define love and what you mean by it. But metta does not presuppose liking or approving of the being. It doesn't mean you want to be associated with them. Now, for example, we have a chant, a Pali chant, one of the paritas that we used to do in the jungle in Thailand, where you extend metta to the 4 families of snakes, to all creeping and crawling things, whether they have 6 legs, 4 legs, 6 legs, 8 legs, or many legs. And may they all be well and happy. But then there's the line, may you stay well away from me. You can have metta for a scorpion. You should have metta for the scorpion, but it doesn't mean you want to take him into your sleeping bag and cuddle him. The metta just means may you be well and happy. May you be free of distress. So it's wishing them well. Doesn't imply liking, approving, or wanting to associate with them. So that would separate it from what we generally understand by loving nature in English. Although it is a form of love. It's a benevolence, so well-wishing. So there are, so we'll stick with metta for a while, and I'll go on to the other ones. There are different ways of practicing the Brahmaviharas, and we'll take metta as the example. I think the important thing is the feeling that is aroused, that the actual nimitta of this meditation is an emotive state. It's the feeling of benevolence. It's not anything else. All the attributes of the meditation are aids to bring that forward. There is, for example, repetition of chanting in English or in Pali. May I be well and happy. May all beings be well and happy. And there's some expanded versions of that. There's also the visualization, that you visualize extending metta to beings. And whatever works for you, but the important thing is to arouse that state. And there are all kinds of variations of ways of practicing these, but there are 2 broad methods of doing Brahmaviharas. One is directed towards specific objects, and the other one is what's called general pervasion. So when you do it towards specific objects, you're doing it towards individuals, and there's a traditional list that you use. You begin with yourself, and this is very important, and it's a first step that is absolutely critical to doing any of the Brahmaviharas. That you feel that metta towards yourself. May I be well and happy. This is sometimes problematic for some people. They're very self-critical and negative towards themselves, and they really need to work on this step. And even if that's all they do for the whole session, it's worth it. May I be well and happy. May all good things come from me. That's not just the same as with others. It's not approving of yourself and not trying to pretend you don't have any faults. It's just may I be well and happy. It should be very simple, but Some people find it difficult. And it's absolutely critical that you do that. For one way of understanding it, if you cannot arouse metta for yourself, you can't bring it forward in a genuine way towards anybody else. And conversely, if you do bring it forth towards yourself, you cannot stop there, because it's such an overflowing feeling that it can't be limited to just one being. You're going to naturally want to extend it. If you feel well wishing towards yourself, you'll naturally extend it to other beings. So this method of sending it towards specific objects, you begin with yourself, and then there's a traditional list. You do your parents next, if they're still alive. Otherwise, you skip this step. Then you direct it towards someone you recognize or relate to as a teacher. Then you do it to a dear friend. Then you do it to a neutral person. That is someone who you can think of. You know the person, an acquaintance, or maybe just someone you pass in the street. You can remember their face. But someone you don't have any strong feelings towards either way. And then you end it with the enemy, someone who gives you a hard time, someone who's done you wrong, or someone who brings up anger when you think of them. So you start, it should be the easiest cases first, and then working towards the more difficult ones. And some people like to use visualization for this, depending on your faculty of visualization. You just imagine their face, or even just, think of them sitting in front of you, facing you cross-legged. They're just right there, but you're sending them metta, wishing them well. The selection of the objects, of the individuals, there are a couple of restrictions that are mentioned in the Sudimagga. First of all, you should not use as a specific object anyone who's dead, only the living. And the reason for this is, if that being is in the ghost realm and you direct the metta towards them, then it actually doesn't help them. It causes them to hang around and enjoy that feeling of metta, and they don't pass on to take a better rebirth. The proper practice towards the dead is to offer merit. There's do meritorious deeds and make the aspiration, may this act of kindness, may the benefit of this go to my dead relative. But you don't use dead people as objects of metta, as specific objects of metta. The second category to avoid is anybody that might arouse sexual desire in you, someone of the appropriate age and gender characteristics that might arouse sensual desire, because metta can easily turn into sensuality, and then it spoils the meditation. So you avoid those classes of people as specific objects. There's also, I have to tell you this story, there's also a suggestion that this list could be expanded. I was attending a monastic gathering once, and one of our monks had arrived by plane, and he told the story that he had a long wait in the airport, and he was practicing metta, sitting on the bench practicing metta. And the security came around with the sniffer dog, sniffs for drugs or explosives. And he sent metta to the security man, and then he sent metta to the dog. And the dog picked up on it and came and nuzzled him. So, okay, come on, you got to have a little chat here. So he got in trouble, he had to be searched and harassed a bit. So one of the senior monks said, I guess we can expand that list from the Visuddhimagga, that you don't send metta to the dead, to the sexually desirable, or to drug-sniffing dogs. It's a modern addition. And it said that you reach perfection in this method by breaking down the barriers, when there's no difference in the quality of the metta between any of the categories. And there's a story told in the Visuddhimagga to illustrate this. It said that there's a monk traveling with some companions. One of his companions is a boyhood friend. They ordained together and they've been friends for decades. Another one is the second companion is a monk from another monastery that they just picked up on the road and joined their party, and they don't know him very well. And the third one is an old craggy monk who's always giving them a hard time and complaining and just a big annoyance. And this monk, who's the actor in the story, he was seized by some bandits who belonged to a cult of human sacrificial cult. And they were seizing. They wanted to take a victim for to sacrifice to their goddess, and they said to this monk, "You choose which one of the four we're going to kill, yourself or one of the others." And what do you think this monk said? Now, some people would, I think, sort of easy answers to say, well, he would sacrifice himself and save the others. But that's wrong. That's not incorrect answer. The correct answer is that he said, I can't choose. It's all the same to me. Just draw straws or cast dice and choose one that way. That's breaking down the barriers, that there's no differentiation between self and dear person and neutral person and an enemy. The feeling is the same towards all four. And it's kind of a gruesome story, as many of the old Pali stories are, but it would work just as well if instead of killing someone, someone was to get a fabulous reward and you had to choose who got it. It would be the same thing. So the perfection is breaking down the barriers, is having no difference in feeling between oneself, the dear person, the neutral person, and the enemy. They're all felt with the same degree of metta. The other way of doing, and that way I will say that this method by individuals is more focused, and you can get a more intense samadhi leading into jhana with this method, because you have a very focused object. But the other method is by general pervasion, and that has the advantage of really opening up the mind. And this is where the meaning of boundless state really comes into play. It's really expansive for the mind, and it's very purifying and uplifting, and it's something that is very useful to do if you're in a dark state of mind, if you're tending towards depression or a lot of negative feelings. Then this method can really blow out the cobweb, so to speak. And the idea is extending metta to all beings in the universe. but it's done by expanding from the center. So again, you start with yourself, and I find it very useful doing this to center the awareness at the middle of the chest, in the heart chakra. And take a few breaths with your consciousness focused in the center of the chest, and work from that point throughout. And begin with yourself again. May I be well and happy. May all good things be for me. And then extend it outwards in increasing circles to the beings and any other beings in the room, if you're there with other people, or if there are animals or insects in the room, may all these beings be well and happy. And then expand it outwards to the surrounding area, then to the sending metta out into the infinity of space, to whatever vast unknown numbers of beings there may be in all the 10 directions of the cosmos. And I would recommend, if you do this general privation and you're extending your metta out into the infinity, that when you end the session, you take it backwards in reverse order. You do it much more quickly, but bring it back, from the infinity of the universe to this earth, to this continent, to this locality, to me. Bring it back in stages to yourself, and then hold a few breaths at the end. May I be well and happy. So that you ground at the end. You're not you emerge from the meditation grounded and feeling connected. You're not leaving half your consciousness out on the other side of the Big Dipper somewhere. And as also a very important general rule is that if these states, beginning with metta, are to be spiritually effective, they have to be universal. You cannot make exceptions. You cannot choose to have metta for this one and not that one. You have to include all beings, including those that you would think of as wrongdoers, or as just complete nuisances and pests like mosquitoes. Whatever class of beings there are, may they be well and happy. So that's metta. Karuna is translated as compassion, and that's not a bad translation, but you have to be a little bit careful, because the English word compassion, it comes from Latin root, meaning to suffer with. And that's not exactly karuna, because karuna, the aspiration is, may all beings be released from suffering. May they be freed from the suffering that they're experiencing. And it's not to be confused with the vicarious suffering. Just think you're not trying to add to the sum total of suffering in the universe by taking on other beings' suffering and experiencing it vicariously. So if it makes you feel sad to contemplate the other being's suffering, then it's not truly karuna. In the Abhidhamma, when there's a section detailing which mental states can occur with which kind of feeling tone, and the feeling tone of unhappiness never arises in a skillful mind state. That's something to contemplate. There's never any value in feeling sad. It's not spiritually beneficial. So karuna shouldn't make you feel sad. It's not a vicarious suffering. That's very important distinction, and that's a useful test to say, am I really doing Karuna, or am I falling into kind of model and pity? Karuna should, it maybe is not as joyous as doing Metta, or certainly not as joyous as doing Mudita, but it shouldn't have a negative feeling tone. Compassion, a feeling of wishing beings be released from suffering. And you can do it the same methods, either towards individuals or towards general pervasion, towards the whole universe. The distinction here would be, if you're choosing individual beings to radiate Karuna to, you may wish to focus beings that, besides fitting into one of the appropriate categories, they're in some particular state of suffering that you can wish they be relieved from. So that's aspiration. And then general pervasion, you're sending it out to every direction of the universe and wishing that beings be released from suffering. So you are focusing somewhat more on the unhappy experiences of beings, maybe be released from these painful experiences. Mudita is the complementary opposite of Karuna. It's generally called sympathetic joy, and the aspiration or wish is, may beings continue to enjoy the happiness they have found. Because most beings in the universe will have some mix of happiness and suffering. And in the Karuna, you're focusing on the suffering. Here, you're focusing on happiness. May they continue to enjoy pleasant experiences. And it doesn't have to be, the idea is, it doesn't have to be elevated, spiritually refined states of happiness. The example given in the Visuddhimagga for Mudita is if you see somebody riding down through the road on a richly adorned elephant. And maybe all you've got is a broken down old donkey, but this guy's got a richly adorned elephant. And the negative state of mind would be to feel envious. How come he's got that wonderful elephant? I just got this half crippled donkey. But the Mudita is just to rejoice in that. Oh, he's happy. May he continue to enjoy that happiness. So it's a very worldly, mundane kind of happiness that's given as an example. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something refined, but you're wishing beings continue to enjoy their happiness. For some reason, this Mudita doesn't get talked about very much, but it's a very brightening and a joyful meditation. It can really lift the spirits if you get some facility with it. And again, it can be done either through individual objects or through general pervasion. So these first three, Metta, Karuna, Mudita, they're all variations on a theme. Upekkha is different. It's in a class of its own. Upekkha is generally translated as equanimity. And there are different kinds of equanimity. Equanimity needed in insight meditation is equanimity towards dhammas, or individual mind objects. This is Upekkha as a Brahmavihara is equanimity towards beings. So it's a broader brush. It's not as refined in that sense as the insight equanimity. The traditional contemplation for Upekkha is different than the others in that the other three involve an aspiration. May beings be well and happy, may they be free of suffering, may they continue to enjoy the happiness they have attained. Upekkha involves no aspiration. You're not trying, you're not wishing or aspiring for something to improve or to be better. You're just recognizing things as they are, for good or ill. And the traditional contemplation is around karma. All beings are experiencing the fruits of their karma. All beings are born of their karma. They abide in their karma. So it's a recognition of cause and effect. And whether they're suffering or they're happy, this is a result of their karma. And that's just as it is. And all beings are subject to their karma. Now that's the traditional contemplation. That may be a little abstract to really get into. And I have heard a suggestion of an alternate contemplation that works quite well. Is may this being, or no, sorry, because there's no may. Just, this being just wants happiness, doesn't want suffering. This being just wants happiness, doesn't want suffering. So this is looking at an aspect of beings that is universal. Obviously, in the multiplicity of beings in the universe, there are endless differences and variations. Even just within the human existence, there are all kinds of ways we can differentiate and categorize people. But there is some aspect of all beings that's universal.